What's up, 360? Happy Earth Day. All right. So, back to Hebrews. Welcome to Wednesday. Hope you guys are having a great day. And a great morning. So, we're going to jump into the book of Hebrews, chapter 5. And we're going to start at verse 7 today. And before we do, if you know me, you know that one of my all-time favorite movies is, you guess it, The Karate Kid. Miyagi-Do Karate. This is my Karate Kid shirt from, I think, Kohl's that Amy got me one time because she's awesome. But a little bit more about The Karate Kid in just a moment. Chapter 5, verse 7. While Jesus was here on earth, he offered prayers and pleadings with a loud cry and tears to the one who could rescue him from death. And God heard his prayers because of his deep reverence for God. Even though Jesus was God's son, he learned obedience from the things he suffered. In this way, God qualified him as a perfect high priest, and he became the source of eternal salvation for all those who obey him. So a couple things that stick out to me. Verse 8, even though Jesus was God's son, he learned obedience from the things he suffered. Even though Jesus was and is fully God, his experience in time and space as a human being had this process. And even though he was God and everything was made through him, he was fully human and had to learn things and had to be perfected. It says in a couple different places in Hebrew. And you may ask, well, wasn't he perfect? He was like without sin. Yes, he absolutely was without sin, but he had a process by which he became completed as a human being, right? In the sense of he had to grow into maturity, and he had to grow into experiencing all the different things like suffering, all the different pains, all the different emotions, all of those things. He lived a human life and did so without sinning, but he was perfected through it, and there's a completeness or wholeness that came about. Verse 10 says, and God designated him to be a high priest in the order of Melchizedek. We won't go into that today, but Melchizedek is a figure, a character that Hebrews talks about, and that takes a whole other session to explain. Verse 11, there's much more we would like to say about this, but it's difficult to explain, especially since you are spiritually dull and don't seem to listen. You've been believers so long now that you ought to be teaching others. Instead, you need someone to teach you again the basic things about God's word. You're like babies who need milk and cannot eat solid food. For someone who lives on milk is still an infant and doesn't know how to do what is right. But solid food is for the mature, who through training have the skill to recognize the difference between right and wrong. So that's where we're going to stop for today in the book of Hebrews. And my challenge is this. This is a pretty, the author of Hebrews is pretty straight up. He doesn't mince words, right? He's kind of like, hey, I'd love to talk more about this, but you're kind of like spiritual babies. You should be mature. He's like, but you haven't done the things in order to develop your faith. You should be teaching others, except you still need to be taught some of the fundamentals. And this is a challenge. Maybe you are a baby Christian, and maybe you're still kind of learning the things of the faith, and that's awesome. Stay on that path. But maybe you've been a believer for a lot of years, and yet maybe you have kind of failed to meet the challenge of growing spiritually mature. And the author of Hebrews says, hey, that's not cool. That's not okay. Like, you should pursue that for sure. And here's how he says those who have attained maturity have achieved that. He says in verse 14 of chapter 5, solid food is for those who are mature. How do they achieve that? Who through training have the skill to recognize the difference between right and wrong. And I love that verse because I'm a big believer in training yourself to be holy, training yourself to be righteous, training yourself to build good habits that will help you to grow in maturity in your faith. And back to the Karate Kid, there's a great scene in that movie where Daniel is so confused with what he's doing. He's doing all these chores for Mr. Miyagi, right? And he's like waxing the car and painting the fence and sanding the floor and painting the house. He's like, what does all this have to do? And Mr. Miyagi brings it all together. He says, this is your training. You're training to be proficient in karate. And by doing these things, it's going to increase your proficiency. So what are you doing in order to train yourself to become like Jesus? In order to train yourself to become mature? Are you in your word? Are you reading the scriptures? Are you putting aside time to pray? Are you putting aside time to just sit and be still and pause and be silent before God each day? Are you paying attention to your thought patterns and your actions? And are you doing so in a way that is training you to become godly? So that's my challenge to you today. How are you training? If you've been keeping up and have been in the Word and been following along, my guess would be that you are at least seeking to train to become more like Christ by kind of engaging and being in His Word. So love you guys. Blessings to you today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and keep training to be mature. See you later.